The Biden administration taking action on gun safety with a new rule requiring background checks on buyers at gun shows.
This administration's historic efforts to stop the illegal flow of guns and hold those who supply firearms.
Rule to clarify who must obtain a federal firearms license to include those selling at gun shows.
Predominantly to earn a profit, you must be licensed and you must conduct background checks.
The Biden administration is announcing a new rule aimed at closing what's known as the gun show loophole.
New gun regulation. All right, let's talk about something pretty big that's been making headlines lately. The Biden administration's new gun regulation. So, picture this. With gun violence being a major issue across the country, President Joe Biden and his team decided enough is enough. They rolled up their sleeves and introduced a brand spanking new regulation aimed at tackling this problem head on. Now, why is this such a big deal? Well, for starters, it's a major step in the fight against gun violence. Think about it like this. By tightening up regulations around who can sell guns and who they can sell them to, they're making it harder for firearms to end up in the wrong hands. That means safer communities and fewer tragic incidents caused by gun violence.
The Biden administration taking action on gun safety with a new rule requiring background checks on buyers at gun shows.
The Justice Department is issuing one of the most significant gun regulations in decades.
This administration's historic efforts to stop the illegal flow of guns and hold those who supply firearms.
Justice Department just announced a new rule taking effect today that clarifies who must obtain a federal firearms license.
But it's not just about making it harder to get guns. It's also about making sure that when people do get their hands on firearms, they're doing it the right way. That's where background checks come in. See, before this regulation, there was a pretty big loophole that allowed some gun sales to slip through the cracks without any background checks. Not cool, right? Well, the Biden administration thought so too. So they tightened things up and made it mandatory for every gun sale to go through a background check. It's all about keeping tabs on who's getting their hands on these weapons and making sure they're not a threat to society. Now, we know what you might be thinking, but what about people who sell guns at gun shows or online? Aren't they exempt from these rules? Well, they used to be, but not anymore. The Biden administration said, "Not on our watch," and expanded the definition of who qualifies as a gun dealer. That means even those folks selling guns at gun shows or online platforms have to play by the same rules as the big-time gun shops. No more loopholes, no more excuses. Overall, this new regulation is a big deal because it shows that the Biden administration is serious about tackling gun violence. They're not just sitting back and hoping things get better on their own. They're taking action, they're making changes, and they're doing it all in the name of public safety. So whether you're a supporter of stricter gun control measures or just someone who wants to feel a little safer in their community, this is definitely a step in the right direction. Expansion of definition. Alright, buckle up because we're diving into some nitty-gritty details about the Biden administration's new gun regulation. One of the major changes they've made is expanding the definition of who counts as a gun dealer or seller. Now you might be thinking, what's the big deal about that? Well, let me break it down for you. In the past, there were some pretty big loopholes that allowed certain folks to sell guns without having to follow all the rules that traditional gun dealers have to follow. These loopholes mainly revolved around selling guns at places like gun shows or through online platforms. See, because these sellers weren't technically considered dealers under the old definition, they could get away with skipping things like background checks and other important safety measures.
The Biden administration is announcing a new rule aimed at closing what's known as the gun show loophole.
Rule to clarify who must obtain a federal firearms license to include those selling at gun shows.
This affects vendors at gun shows and who must go through background checks before a firearms purchase.
It received nearly 388,000 comments, which overwhelmingly favored this new rule.
Predominantly to earn a profit, you must be licensed and you must conduct background checks.
Well, think about it like this. Closing these loopholes means that there are fewer opportunities for people to skirt around the rules and sell guns without proper oversight. That means fewer chances for guns to fall into the hands of folks who shouldn't have them, whether that's because of a criminal record, a history of violence, or something else altogether. By expanding the definition of gun dealers and sellers, the Biden administration is sending a clear message. They're serious about keeping our community safe. They're not just sitting back and hoping for the best. They're taking action to address the root causes of gun violence and make meaningful changes to our laws. Background checks mandated. Alright, let's talk about one of the most important aspects of the Biden administration's new gun regulation: background checks. Now you might be thinking, don't we already have background checks for buying guns? And you'd be right, to an extent. But here's the thing, there were some pretty big loopholes in the system that allowed a significant percentage of gun sales to happen without any background checks at all. Not cool, right? Well, the Biden administration thought so too. That's why they made it a top priority to close these loopholes and make background checks mandatory for all gun sales, no matter where they take place. Whether you're buying a gun from a licensed dealer, a private seller at a gun show, or even online, you've got to pass a background check first. It's all about making sure that the folks getting their hands on firearms are responsible, law-abiding citizens who don't pose a threat to public safety.
The Biden White House is issuing a rule designed to close a gap that allows gun buyers to avoid background checks.
The Biden administration is taking the most significant step to strengthen background checks for gun purchases.
By the things we're seeing, there are tens of thousands of unlicensed dealers in firearms out there.
Licensing of people who are selling guns in the United States of America by eliminating the so-called gun show loophole.
Now proposing a major plan for gun reform that could close the gun show loophole.
And what's even scarier is that some of these guns were ending up in the hands of folks who definitely shouldn't have them. Whether it's because of a history of domestic violence, a mental health issue, or something else altogether. By making background checks mandatory for all gun sales, the Biden administration is closing off one of the biggest avenues for these dangerous individuals to get their hands on firearms. Opposition from MAGA supporters. Now let's talk about something that's as controversial as it gets. Opposition to the Biden administration's new gun regulation. Brace yourself, because we're diving into some deep waters here. So picture this, you've got the Make America Great Again, MAGA movement, and the National Rifle Association, NRA, two heavy hitters when it comes to gun rights, lining up against this new regulation like it's a showdown at high noon. Why? Well, for starters, they see it as an infringement on their Second Amendment rights. To them, any attempt to tighten up gun regulations is seen as a threat to their freedom to bear arms. But here's the thing, this opposition isn't just about politics, it's about ideology too. See, for a lot of MAGA supporters and NRA members, guns aren't just tools for self-defense or hunting. They're symbols of freedom and independence. So, when the government starts talking about background checks and tighter regulations, it's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. They see it as an attack on their way of life, and they're not afraid to fight back. But here's the kicker. This opposition isn't just about principle, it's also about power. See, the NRA has a long history of flexing its political muscle to influence gun policy in America. They've got deep pockets, they've got lobbyists in Washington, and they've got millions of passionate supporters who are ready to fight tooth and nail to protect their Second Amendment rights. So when they see a new regulation like this one coming down the pipeline, you better believe they're going to do everything in their power to stop it right in its tracks. Significance of the regulation. Let's talk about why the Biden administration's new gun regulation is such a big deal. And trust me, it's a doozy. First off, this regulation isn't just another piece of legislation. It's a historic step in the fight against gun violence. Picture this. For years, communities across America have been grappling with the devastating effects of gun violence, from mass layings to everyday acts of violence on the streets. It's a problem that's touched the lives of millions of Americans, and it's high time something was done about it. That's where this regulation comes in. By tightening up regulations around who can sell guns and who they can sell them to, the Biden administration is striking at the heart of the problem. See, by making it harder for firearms to end up in the wrong hands, they're taking a major step towards reducing the overall level of gun violence in our communities. And that's not just good news, it's potentially life-saving news. Think about it like this. By closing loopholes and expanding background checks, this regulation is making it a whole lot harder for individuals with a history of violence or criminal activity to get their hands on firearms. And that means fewer tragedies, fewer lives lost, and fewer families torn apart by senseless acts of violence. It's all about making our communities safer and more secure for everyone. And that's something we can all get behind. But here's the best part. This regulation isn't just about reducing gun violence. It's also about improving public safety. See, by making it harder for criminals and dangerous individuals to access firearms, we're creating a safer environment for everyone. Whether you're walking down the street, shopping at the mall, or sending your kids to school. It's all about giving people peace of mind and making our communities places where everyone can feel safe and secure. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.